Peace be with you. Friends, a couple of summers ago, I had the great privilege of visiting in connection with a film we were making, the sites connected to St. Ignatius of Loyola. We went to the Basque Country, to Loyola, where he was born and where he recuperated from his war wounds, where he had his great conversion experience. We went to Montserrat, that wonderful Benedictine monastery, where he pledged his life to Christ. We ended up in the rooms where he died in Rome, right next to the great church of the Gesù, where he's buried. But for me, the most moving place to visit was a little cave in a town called Manresa. Manresa is not too far from Barcelona. And the young Ignatius, after he's turned his life over to Christ, spends about 9 months literally living in this cave in utter simplicity. He had been obsessed as a young man with his appearance. He wanted to be a courtier. He wanted to cut a dashing figure. So trying to turn away from that, he kind of let himself go. He let his hair grow, let his fingernails grow. He lived in poverty and simplicity and fasting for those 9 months. He was often consumed with lust, and so he lived in an austere celibacy for that time. Since he was so obsessed with his reputation, he decided to live for those months as a nobody, even as worse than a nobody. Because anyone seeing him would say, well, who's that weirdo? Who's that vagabond wandering around? That's how he lived for those 9 months. And out of that experience came the famous spiritual exercises. If you go on a Jesuit retreat to this day, you'll be taken through the exercises that he composed while he was going through that time at Manresa. Now, I think the heart of what he learned at that time, the heart of what he teaches in the exercises, is this idea of detachment. He was attached to many of the goods of the world. I've named some of them. Wealth and power and prestige and cutting a dashing figure, all that. But if he was to do the will of God, he knew he had to become detached from those addictions and those obsessions. So during those 9 months, in a particularly intense way, he engaged in this spiritual exercise of detachment. You know what came out of it is a principle that's basic to the exercises, basic to Jesuit spirituality. He called it the agere contra, which is Latin simply for to act against, to do against. The idea is simple. If you're attached or addicted to some worldly good, well, then the best thing is to act against it, is to press aggressively even in the opposite direction. Remember long ago, the great Greek philosopher Aristotle said if a stick is bent this way and the idea is to straighten it out, you have to kind of bend it back the other direction. You have to bend it out of shape in the other direction to bring it back on line. So if your spiritual life is disordered, like you're drawn to a worldly good in an exaggerated way, well, then you got to run in the other direction. Agere contra. So, for example, Ignatius teaches, if sensual pleasure, let's say the goods of eating and drinking are really important to you, and look in our culture today, there are a lot of us who are preoccupied with eating and drinking and good food and all that. Well, if that's your hang-up, agere contra. Act against it. Fast. Why is fasting so important in the spiritual order? Because we hate this world and we hate sensual pleasure. No. It's this bent stick idea that if you're exaggeratedly pulled in that direction, you got to go in the opposite direction. So you fast. Let's say you're too caught up in nice things. Being surrounded by the comforts of the world have become too much of a preoccupation for you. Maybe you're spending a lot of your waking hours obsessed with, making your life as comfortable as possible. Well then, agere contra. Live as Ignatius did, not only at Manresa, but other points in his life, on purpose living in radical simplicity and poverty. To this day, young Jesuit novices practice this. They're given a little bit of money and they're told to go on a kind of pilgrimage. They got to get from point A to point B, but relying not on their own resources, but relying on the providence of God and the goodness of people around them. So when you're too addicted to the comfortable life, you actively embrace an uncomfortable life. Suppose you're too attached to money, and there are many of us in our culture who are in that situation. It's become a kind of addiction. I never have enough of it. So I strive and strive and strive. People that invest in the stock market, they do fine, but it's not enough. They've got big bank accounts, but they're not big enough. Let's say money has become your preoccupation. Well, agere contra. Give a lot of it away. For how many people in the spiritual life, you look at over the history of the saints, you'll find this move. Maybe Francis of Assisi, most famously, literally handing over all of his possessions, including the clothes on his back. Give away your money. Give away your material things if that's become too much an obsession to you. Suppose, like Ignatius of Loyola, who wanted to be the dashing courtier, you're preoccupied with honor, with being noticed. Everyone's looking at me. Well, there are a lot of us in our culture today who are preoccupied with this. I want to be in the first place. I want to be the one that's in the headlines. I want to be the one who's noticed. Well, if that's your hang-up, agere contra. Actively seek obscurity. Actually seek not to be noticed. Go in the opposite direction. Okay? Agere contra in service of detachment, which is finally in service of doing God's will. Now, I want to be really clear about that. I want to say that again. So we don't get hung up on this as some kind of puritanical program. It's not that at all. It's the agere contra so as to get away from attachments which are preventing me from doing God's will. Because what matters is God's will. That's why Ignatius says at the beginning of the exercises, Lord, whether I have a long life or short life, I don't care. Whether I'm rich or poor, I don't care. Whether they love me or hate me, I don't care, as long as I'm doing your will. The whole purpose of the exercises is to find that will, to discern the will of God. But to follow it, I've got to be detached. To be detached, I've got to agere contra. That's the program. Okay. All of that is an introduction to this famous story we see in the gospel today. Jesus is at a banquet. And, not a little family supper, but a banquet. A lot of, rich and famous people there. And we have our version of that. Where you go to a formal dinner and all the, the insiders are there. All the big wheels are there. What does he notice? He noticed how people are actively looking for the most prominent place at the banquet. And again, of fellow sinners, right? We know how this works. You come in the room, a lot of famous people there, and can I get that front table? Can I be with, the glitterati? Can I be with the rich and the famous people? Can I jockey for position so that everybody notices me? We play this game all the time. Jesus says, when you're invited to a wedding banquet, don't recline at the place of honor. Rather, when you're invited, go and take the lowest place. What's he talking about? Avant la lettre, right? Long before Ignatius, he's talking about the agere contra. If this is your temptation, and it is for a lot of us, then purposely and actively move in the opposite direction. Take the lowest place. How often, like when you come into a room like that, you know what I'm talking about, and you feel the temptation, I got to be number one here. Can you say, you know what, on purpose, I'm going to sit at table 135. I'm going to make myself obscure. I'm going to make sure that they don't notice me. Think of how many times, how much energy is spent in our lives jockeying for position. What if we said, I'm going to opt out. I'm just not going to play the game. Well, one thing, you'll throw everybody off, believe me. They'll wonder what is going on. You'll throw everybody off. But also, you're going to find something like freedom. If we get that monkey of attachment off our backs, oh, I need to be more wealthy. I need to be more powerful. I need to be more honored. It's an addiction. And our language of addiction is the best way to translate the spiritual principle, I think. You know how addictions work is you get something and you get a buzz from it. This is booze, this is the drugs, this is sex, this is honor, this is money, whatever it is. But then it wears off. Well, I got to get more of it. And then you get the buzz, but it wears off even faster. Then you got to get more of it, more of it, more of it. Before you know it, your whole life is preoccupied with attaining these worldly goods. And what that's doing, everybody, is it's blocking your access to the will of God. What a liberation if you can finally say, you know what? I'm not going to play the game. I'm out. You know, I've been thinking a lot about this with social media, and I know I'm on social media right now. You know, if you're watching this sermon, I get it. It's good in many ways. But it becomes its own addiction too. It draws us into itself. And the liberation that comes when I can just say, you know what? I'm out. If you want to understand religious vows, think of it along these lines. That's exactly what it is. You say, well, why would these people have poverty and chastity and obedience? Why would they do that? Because they realize they're in the grip of addictions. Why would you take a vow of poverty? So you're out of the game of questing for more and more wealth. Why would you accept something like chastity or celibacy? Because you don't want to be in that game of constantly searching for that pleasure. Why obedience? Well, because, look, I'm looking for power and prestige, and I'm number one all the time. What if I just opted out of that game? And I said, no, I'm willing to be told what to do. I'm willing to be put in my place by somebody else. That's what happened to Ignatius in Manresa, letting his fingernails grow and his hair grow. I'm out of the game. That's what he was saying. I'm out of the game of who's the top courtier. Living in poverty and simplicity. I'm out of the game of who's rising, who's fallen, who's richer. Forget it. Forget it. So think of this simple image, everybody. They're all jockeying for the highest position. Jesus says, hey, you know what? Take the lowest place. Because you're probably going to find, let's be honest, more interesting people on table 135. Am I right? You know, I mean, you're up at table number one. You're with a lot of obsessives. You're with a lot of weirdos and obsessives at table number one because they're all caught in this. They're not that interesting. Again, am I right? They're not that interesting. Go to table 135. They're a lot more because they're more real. And then secondly, you're going to be breathing much freer spiritual air at table 135. Take the lowest place. It's actually a lot more fun. And God bless you. Peace be with you. Friends, the last several weeks, we've been reading from this section of Luke that talks about the demands of discipleship, the radicality of what it means to follow Jesus. But let me tell you something now. Here's a hint. It's a clue. We are called to be so radical. Why? Because we're meant to imitate the even more dramatically radical way that God loves us. Be perfect, Jesus says, as your heavenly Father is perfect. In other words, in your moral and spiritual life, you're meant to mirror, to echo the infinite, extravagant love of God. See, it's never just awful moral demand to try to placate this overbearing deity. No. It's a radical love on our part that's meant to respond to the ever more radical love on God's part. So with the gospel today, we're shifting focus from what we're obliged to do, really, to who God is. Jesus paints for us in these three parables a portrait of God. Now, again, let me just remind you of something. All of us sinners, we tend to fall into this kind of logic when it comes to God. So there's God, kind of difficult, a bit tyrannical, difficult, hard to placate. And if I do enough right things, I might satisfy him sufficiently to get him to love me. Now, maybe, in our kind of official theological position, we wouldn't say that, but a lot of us feel that way when it comes to God. Is God's kind of difficult, demanding, and so if I can, reach a certain moral height, then God will love me. Can I suggest to you, the New Testament blows that logic out of the water. Page after page after page, story after story after story, the New Testament blows out of the water that way of thinking about God. What the New Testament gives us, and see, Jesus is nothing but the icon of his Father. Jesus is the God-man. He's God now manifesting his godliness in this human form. What does Jesus show us? That God is, if I can borrow that lovely phrase from Catherine of Siena, God is pazzo d'amore. That means he's crazy in love with us. Pazzo d'amore. He's crazy. He's irrational. He doesn't correspond to this neat logic that we propose. If I do enough good things, then maybe I'll get him to love me. God is crazy in love with his creation. And now look at that principle as it's displayed in these three parables. So we know this familiar story. Jesus says, "What man among you, having 100 sheep and losing one, would not leave the 99 in the desert and go after the lost one till he finds it?" Well, one way to answer that question is nobody would do that. No shepherd would be so stupid as to do that. You've got your 99 sheep, and if you leave them, well, they'll all go wandering off. They'll be susceptible to attacks from animals and so on. So, okay, I got 100. One has wandered away. Well, now I better make a calculation. Is it better to cut my losses and let the one go and keep the 99? I think most sensible shepherds would say, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. But I'm going to leave the 99 and go chasing after this one whom I might never find. And then I come back having not found him, only to discover that the 99 have now wandered away. It's crazy to behave that way. But that's exactly how God behaves. This sinner, this idiot, this jerk, this loser has wandered off into some dysfunctional life. And God's got all these people, these good people, these saints who are following his laws, and he loves them. And all right, this one guy's wandered away. I'm not going to bother chasing after the likes of him. Well, yeah, that's our logic. That's the way we think. It's not the way God thinks. No, God, like a crazy shepherd, pazzo d'amore, like a crazy shepherd, goes running after the one lost sheep. In my pastoral ministry, everybody, over the years, how often I've heard something like, Father, God would never forgive me. I'm such a loser and I've done so many bad things. God has no time for somebody like me. Not the God Jesus reveals. Goes after the lost sheep, goes after the one who's wandered far away. He's crazy in love. How about the second parable, which, if anything, is even goofier? So he imagines this woman who's lost a coin, and the coin in question is something so small, it's like a penny. So she's lost this coin. And what's she do? Well, she turns the whole house upside down, searching for it. All day long, hours and hours. And then she finds it, and she runs to her friends and says, "Hey, we got to have a party. I found this penny." What, are you nuts? Put that in our situation. Oh my goodness, I've lost a penny. Well, you lost a penny. Who cares? No, I'm going to tear the whole house upside down. I'm going to turn the furniture upside down. I'm going to spend hours to find the penny. And then when I find it, I'm going to go across the street to my neighbors and say, hey, everybody, let's celebrate. I found a lost penny. What are you, out of your mind? Are you pazzo? Are you crazy? See, that's the point here, everybody. That's the point. Jesus is saying that's what God is like. So there's this one poor loser, this poor sinner, a nobody. God's got all these people that are following his laws, all these good saints who are doing what he wants. And there's this one nobody who's wandered far, far away, this little penny of a person. Who cares? No, but God is going to turn the whole room upside down to find that one little nobody. And when he does, he wants everybody involved in the party. That's what God is like. That's what God is like. What does Jesus say? That he makes his sun to shine on the good and bad alike. It's not like, I'll make a calculus here. If you're good, I'll give you some sunshine. If you're not, you don't get any sunshine. No, he is love straight through. That's all he is. So he doesn't know how to do anything else but love those who are righteous and those who are unrighteous. He makes his refreshing rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike. These are desert people now. They love the rain, And so the logic would be, yeah, if you're good and you're holy and you're righteous, then he'll send you his refreshing rain. If you're not, you're stuck in the desert. But that's not the way God operates. He makes his rain to fall on the good and the bad alike. He'll turn the whole darn house upside down to find one penny. He'll go traipsing around, leaving the 99 to find that one lost sheep. Okay, those two stories of mine, I'll briefly look at maybe the greatest story ever told and the most famous of Jesus' parables. And you see now why it fits right in this context. The parable of the prodigal son. I'll just say a few things about it. How it begins. The man had 2 sons, and the younger says, Father, give me my share of the estate that should come to me. Well, as everyone points out, this is hugely insulting to the father. What he's saying basically is, look, I'm too impatient to wait for you to die. Give me my inheritance now. It was supremely insulting to the father. I love how in one sentence he says a version of me 3 times. Give me my share that's coming to me. This is like the ultimate slap in the face of the Father. This is all of us, right? All of us sinners when it comes to God. And then, so the Father, gives him. He respects his freedom. He gives him his share, which he squanders, of course, immediately. That's the way it goes in the spiritual order, isn't it? Is that when you cling to the divine life, you try to make it your own, you lose it. Because you only have the divine life on the fly. Because the divine life is love. That means as you receive it, you give it. And then you get more. If you try to hang on to it, you will lose it. That's the basic spiritual principle. So he squanders all the inheritance and then finds himself feeding the pigs. In other words, for a Jew, it's about as low as you could get. That you're feeding these unclean animals. He's hit bottom, right? Comes back to the Father. Father, I've sinned against God and against you. I don't deserve to be called your son. But the Father, here's what we're meant to see. The Father who's been looking for him because he sees him while he's still a long way away. That means probably every day he sat waiting for him. And then beautifully, he comes running down the hill to meet him. There was an adage in Jesus' time that the robes of an elder should never flow. That meant that people came to the elder. The elder didn't come to them. They came to him out of respect. But this father throws caution and respectability to the winds. He comes racing down the hill. This son who had insulted him in the most grievous way possible, and then had squandered all his hard-earned inheritance. The father had every right to be indignant. But instead, braces the son, puts the ring on his finger, kills the fatted calf. Pazzo d'amore, are you kidding? Crazy in love, irrational. Of course, over the top, yes. Ridiculous, yes, just like the shepherd, just like the crazy woman looking for the coin. That's how God loves. And then, of course, beautifully, the older son who's out on the hillside hears about all this. And he's someone who's caught right in that logic I described earlier. All right, what's the logic? Well, if I'm good, if I'm obedient, then God will love me. And by implication, someone that's not obedient, someone that doesn't follow the law, like that no good brother of mine, he does not deserve the divine love. And what he's getting the ring and the embrace and the fatted calf. Are you joking? It's a complete violation of the right logic. What does the father say to him? He comes out to him too. Beautiful. My son, everything I have is yours. The older brother is just caught in this awful logic of tit for tat. I do enough, I'll get the love that I merit. God doesn't operate that way. My son, don't you get it? After all these years, don't you get it that everything I have is yours? You don't have to earn it. You don't have to slave for me. That's how he puts it. It's yours as a gift. See, the older brother doesn't understand the nature of his father's love. Like a lot of us. A lot of us are like the older brother, caught in this dead-end spiritual logic. If it could just sink into our hearts, everybody, that God is pozzo d'amore, he's crazy in love with us, then we'd be willing and able to respond with an equally extravagant gift of love. And God bless you. Peace be with you. Friends, these past several weeks, we've been reading from a section of the Gospel of Luke that is actually rather harrowing. What I mean is, we find laid out before us the great principles and challenges of the spiritual life, of what it means to follow Jesus. There are a lot of people today who might be intrigued by Jesus. They find him interesting. Maybe they remember him as a spiritual teacher. He's like a guru. They've got kind of warm feelings about him. Well, can I suggest to you that their ancestors are referenced at the very beginning of the gospel for today? Listen. Great crowds were traveling with Jesus. Yeah, great crowds because he was attractive. He was saying interesting things. He was healing the sick. He was providing what people wanted. He was being treated a bit like a pop star. Who's this fascinating, charismatic figure? And so great crowds were following him. And so he turns to them, he addresses them. But listen to what he says, because he gives them, if you want, on purpose, a sort of slap in the face, as if to say, following me is not a matter of following a pop star. It's not like, a walk in the park. Following me is something of supreme spiritual and moral importance. Listen to what he says now to the crowd following him. If anyone comes to me without hating his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. So you can imagine that scene. All these disciples following the charismatic teacher. They're all full of enthusiasm. He turns, yes, tell us something sweet, something wonderful and uplifting. And that's what he tells them. If anyone comes to me without hating his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters. What? It's a somewhat different version of, unless you love me more than your mother and father, more than your brothers and sisters, you're not worthy of me. First of all, everybody, please see this. This is an affirmation of the divinity of Jesus. Look, you can't imagine another moral or spiritual teacher saying something comparable. They might say, unless you love my teaching, or unless you love the God to whom I point, unless you love the spiritual path that I point out to you more than mother and father, etc. But to say blithely, unless you love me personally more than the most lovable things in the world, unless you hate mother and father, brother and sister, you're not worthy to be my disciple. Well, it begs the Irish ontological question. Who do you think you are? Who could say such a thing? Except the one who is in person the supreme good. This is as high a Christology, I'm using that technical language, as high a Christology as anything in the prologue to the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Okay, that's real clear. This is clear too, once we sort of break the code. The only one who could or should be loved in this way is the one who's the supreme good. Okay, therefore, and the Gospels, again, are over and over again clear on this point. Therefore, in regard to him, a choice has to be made. You know, if he's a spiritual teacher, there are 1,000 spiritual teachers. I could name them up and down the centuries. I could go to the local bookstore here and find all kinds of books by spiritual teachers. But none of them makes this sort of demand on me. Why? Because none of them is claiming what Jesus is claiming here. That's why you're either with me or you're against me. Either you gather with me or you scatter. There's an either or when it comes to Jesus. See, he's saying to his, maybe fair weather fans here, those who are following him because he's fascinating and charismatic, do you realize what following me involves? I'm not just one more prophet. I'm God from God and light from light and true God from true God. Therefore, I must be the absolute center of your life. There can be no compromise. There can be no half measures. You're either with me or you're against me. Jesus calls forth from us a choice the way no other figure, no other philosopher, no other spiritual teacher does. And, he makes this point with typical Semitic exaggeration, but the point remains. Unless you hate your mother and father, brother and sisters. What could this mean? Well, let me suggest something to you. In the measure that mother or father, brother or sisters have become in your life the supreme good, that's a nightmare. That's a problem. That's a huge stumbling block. Now, mother and father, brothers, sisters, lovable? Yeah, sure, of course. But in the measure that they have become the central love and preoccupation of your life, that's a nightmare. And in that measure, they should be hated. If they're playing that role in your life, you have to break with them. What does St. Augustine say? Love God, and then love everything else for the sake of God. Now we're cooking. Now we're on the right track. Jesus has said more or less here, I am divine. I am God. I am the center. Therefore, you must love him above all and everything else, including the people you love the most, for his sake. Let me give you a concrete example here, and you find it a lot in the lives of the saints. That the saints have to make a break at some point with, yes, their mother and father. Yes, with their own families. Think of Francis of Assisi. When he's called by Christ to live this life of radical poverty. And he's living like a vagabond, and he's embarrassing to his father. His father was a, respected businessman in the town of Assisi. Here's Francis giving away all his father's clothes. And so the father challenges him. And in fact, they bring him as a kind of trial before the local bishop. What does Francis do but take off all his clothes and standing naked in the public square? He gives the clothes back to his father and said, I give this all back to you because I'm following my Father in heaven. Unless you hate your mother and father. You see, now, not that I'm saying psychologically Francis hated his father and mother, but he was signaling, you are not the absolute center of my life. Christ is. Another example from an Italian saint, my hero, St. Thomas Aquinas. You know the story that Thomas, as a young man, decides he wants to become a Dominican friar. Well, Dominicans now are a pretty respectable bunch, but in those days, the early days, they were seen as vagabonds. They were this new mendicant order, just a fancy way of saying a begging order, living on the streets, preaching and begging. Well, Thomas, yes, he was in a Benedictine monastery for a time because his aristocratic parents thought he'll become the abbot of Monte Cassino. He'll become a great figure. They never envisioned he'd become a begging friar in the streets. And so Thomas joins the Dominicans. His family gets wind of it, and so his mother in high dudgeon sends a group of her other sons who were mercenaries. And they stop Aquinas. And they try to pull the Dominican habit off his back, and they say Thomas just clung to it tenaciously. And they brought him to a family castle, held him prisoner for a year, hoping to dissuade him from his vocation. Thomas didn't give in. So they finally gave in. They let him go. Unless you hate your mother and father, your brothers and sisters, you're not worthy to be my disciple. Again, I don't mean Thomas Aquinas psychologically hated his mother and father, but he did say, you are not the absolute good in my life. There's a higher good, the Christ who calls me. Now, let me just press this thing, everybody, because Jesus presses it with the crowds who are following him. Unless you hate your mother and father, brothers and sisters, even your own life, you're not worthy to be my disciple. Think about that for a second. Let that sink in, everybody. Look, I've been at this game for a long time. I've known these texts since I was a kid. I've been preaching and teaching them. This text still takes my breath away. Because you say, well, I mean, look, my own life, isn't that what it's finally all about? I mean, everything I ever experienced, well, it's predicated on the fact that I'm alive. It's my life. I can't hate my own life. Can I? Unless you hate your own life. See, this is the metanoia. We say conversion, but it means going beyond the mind you have. Metanous. Going beyond your ordinary way of seeing. See, for all of us, really, all of us sinners, my life is the central preoccupation. I'm just trying to make myself as happy as I can be, right? But the Lord says, unless you hate your own life, my life isn't about me. My life doesn't belong to me. It's not as though everything revolves around my life and my needs and my preoccupations. But now, here's the metanoia. Here's the conversion. Here's the turning around. Here's the radicalization of your life. You now revolve around Christ. Everything that you are, your mind and your will and your heart and your passions and your body and your projects and your plans, they all now begin to revolve around him. That's what it means to hate your own life. Now, can we take one more step? I always imagine if there's anybody still listening to him. So here they are all following him, and he gives them this sermon. I mean, I imagine that a lot of this crowd has drifted away. But how about the last thing he says to them? Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, we, after centuries of hearing this and having spiritualized it, we say, oh, sure, carry your cross means you accept, a burden of suffering, etc. No, but go back to the first century, to these people. They saw this. They saw people being crucified, carrying the crossbeam to the place of their own execution, where they'd be strapped or nailed to this cross and left to die in utter humiliation, utter rejection. I mean, they knew to take up your cross meant something horrific. And the Lord says, whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. In other words, to put radically to death me and mine and I and my projects and my plans and what pleases me. No. Unless you hate mother and father, brother and sister, and yes, even your own life, you cannot be my disciple. It's all about Christ. He comes first. He comes last. He's the Alpha, the Omega. He's the planet around which my whole life must revolve. Maybe everybody, let's put ourselves in the crowd that was following Jesus. A lot of us who are kind of, fair weather fans or sunshine patriots, we're with the Lord as long as it's no threat to us. And then hear these words. See what happens. And God bless you.